Have you ever wondered what within you is quietly determining how you feel, choose, and respond to life? Beneath your familiar thoughts, there is always a deeper world, a place that holds forgotten memories, emotions that have never been named, and parts of yourself you have never truly seen. For Carl Jung, understanding psychology is not only about observing what appears on the surface, but also about listening to the subtle movements taking place behind consciousness. The deeper we step into the inner world, the more we realize that human beings are not as simple as the image they present each day. Reactions that seem sudden, dreams that are difficult to understand, and intense attraction or resistance towards someone may all arise from deeper layers of the psyche. Jung believed that only by turning back to face what has been hidden can a person understand themselves more clearly and live a life that is less controlled by the unconscious. Throughout this 2-hour journey, you will be guided through the most important foundations of Carl Jung's psychology in a slow, reflective, and accessible rhythm. This is not only to help you understand his concepts, but also to recognize how they are already present in your emotions, relationships, and everyday choices. Allow your mind to slow down and listen until the end, because what you discover may not only be how the human psyche operates, but also a part of yourself that has been waiting for a very long time to be seen. Number 1. Exploring the unconscious world hidden deep within the psyche. We often believe that what we know about ourselves represents the entirety of who we are. We know what we like, what we fear, where we want to go, and why we make a certain choice. Yet there are moments when that certainty suddenly begins to waver. A perfectly ordinary sentence hurts us for much longer than it should. Someone has done nothing wrong, yet we already feel unable to trust them. We know that a decision is reasonable, but whenever we are about to act on it, an unnamed resistance appears within us. These reactions do not necessarily prove that we are weak or irrational. They simply show that beneath the part of the mind we can see, other movements are still quietly taking place. Jung called this hidden realm the unconscious, the place that contains what has not yet become clearly present in awareness, but still has the power to influence our emotions, thoughts, and behavior. He once wrote, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good. Not only dark, but also light. Not only bestial, semi-human, and demonic, but superhuman, spiritual, and, in the classical sense of the word, divine." For Jung, the unconscious was not merely a dark corner in which frightening things were stored. It also carried feelings that had not yet found words, possibilities that had not yet been lived, directions a person might not have dared to acknowledge, and a deeper form of understanding that sometimes extended beyond the way reason was accustomed to organizing life. The unconscious rarely speaks to us through a clear sentence. It appears more indirectly, through anxiety without an obvious cause, a sense of familiarity toward a stranger, a choice that continues to repeat even though the result has never changed, or a sadness that rises while everything outside still seems normal. We often see only the final reaction, without realizing that it may have been forming within us for a very long time. For this reason, there are moments when we believe we are reacting to the present, while in reality, the present has merely touched an old emotion that has never been fully recognized. I once knew a woman named Lauren. It was only after she got married that she realized she was not as calm during conflict as she had always believed. Whenever something happened between her and her husband, especially when he chose to remain quiet and calm himself, instead of continuing the argument, Lauren would immediately become angry. She spoke more quickly, her voice grew sharp, and at times she said things that hurt the person she loved, even though she regretted them only a few minutes later. What confused her most was that her husband had never threatened to leave her or treated her disrespectfully. Yet every time he became quiet, an overwhelming sense of panic appeared inside her, as though she were about to lose something deeply important. Only much later, when she began looking back at her childhood, did Lauren gradually understand where that reaction came from. She grew up in a family where, whenever her parents argued, her father would often remain silent for days, while her mother lived with the fear that he might leave. Lauren was only a child at the time, but she unconsciously learned to associate silence with the danger of losing love and safety. Years later, when her husband simply needed some quiet time to organize his emotions, Lauren's conscious mind saw the man standing before her, but her unconscious recognized an old memory she had never truly escaped. Her anger did not begin with the argument that day. It arose from a fear that had quietly lived within her for many years. The unconscious can be imagined as ink that has soaked through to the back of a sheet of paper. On the front, we are writing the story of the present and believing that every line is being created only by the hand we are using now. Yet sometimes, faint traces of ink from the other side still show through, altering the shape of what we are writing without our awareness. We may try to write over them, erase them, or pretend they do not exist, but those marks continue to influence the entire page. Only when we tilt the paper beneath a different angle of light do we begin to recognize what had already been there. Exploring the unconscious does not mean searching for a childhood cause behind every emotion, nor does it mean turning life into an analysis that never ends. What Jung pointed toward was deeper than that. He wanted people to recognize that the conscious ego is not the only participant in this life. Within us are also experiences, needs, and tendencies that have never been put into words. When they remain unseen, they still find ways to express themselves, sometimes through excessive reactions, sometimes through a sense of being trapped, or through our repeated return to situations we already know will cause us pain. For this reason, the most important sign of the unconscious is often not found in what is unfamiliar, but in what continues to repeat. A certain kind of person always attracts us. A fear appears whenever we are about to step into something new. A need to prove ourselves emerges before people who will never truly acknowledge us. A familiar choice keeps drawing us back, even though reason has opposed it many times. Repetition is like a message that has not been written in language. It does not directly tell us what to do, but it reveals that something within us has not yet been understood deeply enough to change. Facing the unconscious also does not begin by fighting against it. We cannot create freedom by hating the parts of ourselves we do not yet understand. A reaction that once helped protect us in the past may no longer be appropriate in the present, but that does not make it an enemy. We can look at it with a calmer attitude and ask, what is being awakened within me? Does this feeling truly belong to the present situation, or is it carrying the weight of another time? That pause alone can create an important shift. We are no longer completely identified with the first emotion that appears. We begin to see it as a message that needs to be heard. The more we understand the unconscious world, the less we have to live as though everything that happens within us is impossible to explain. We begin to recognize that part of what we call fate may sometimes be created by patterns we have never seen. When such a pattern enters consciousness, the past does not immediately disappear, but it no longer has complete authority over our present reactions. We may still feel afraid, but we do not necessarily have to withdraw. We may still feel hurt, but we no longer rush to conclude that we are being rejected. Freedom does not come from no longer having an unconscious. It comes from gradually recognizing what is quietly living within us. This journey does not require you to understand your entire psyche today. It can begin simply by noticing an emotion that repeatedly returns and listening to it before rushing to judge it. If you are willing to offer that presence to your inner world, comment, "I choose to listen." Let it become a gentle reminder that from today onward, you will not only follow the clearest voice of reason, but will also learn to recognize what your soul has quietly been trying to tell you for a very long time. Number 2, psychological energy and the force that drives human beings. If a hidden world is always moving beneath what we consciously recognize, then what causes that world to keep directing us toward a certain person, goal, or way of life? There are periods when we are willing to stay awake late, begin again, and move through hardship simply to come closer to what we desire. Yet there are also times when the things that once excited us suddenly become heavy. Even though the external circumstances have hardly changed, we are still capable of continuing, but within us, the force that once supported each step is no longer there. For Jung, this change is not simply laziness or a lack of willpower. It shows that a person's psychological energy has begun to change direction. Jung called this life force libido, and once wrote, "Libido is appetite in its natural state. This energy is present in the longing to be loved, the desire to be recognized, the passion to create, the need to learn, and the impulse to search for a life with deeper meaning. It does not always have to be loud or intense. Sometimes it is simply the feeling that makes us want to return to a piece of work, even though no one has yet seen the result, to protect a relationship in which something is still worth preserving, or to leave a path even though everyone says we should remain. We may use reason to choose a goal, but psychological energy is what determines whether that goal truly feels alive within us. When that energy gradually diminishes, we are not always able to identify exactly what has exhausted us. Sometimes, people do not truly lack energy. They are simply spending too much of their strength trying to keep themselves in a place where the soul no longer wishes to belong. This appears subtly in Kazuo Ishiguro's novel, The Remains of the Day. Stephen spends most of his life trying to become the perfect butler. He believes that his value lies in his composure, devotion, and ability to place duty above personal emotion. Because of this, he directs almost all his strength towards serving his employer, even while his father is dying, and while Miss Kenton quietly waits for a sign of affection from him. Stevens is not cold or incapable of love. He has simply directed his life force into a single ideal for so long that every other need has come to be seen as a distraction. Only in old age, during a journey in which he looks back upon the years that have passed, does he realize that he has lived a life deeply faithful to duty, but far removed from the things that might have made his heart truly come alive? Stevens's tragedy does not lie in a lack of energy, but in the fact that he has used almost all of that energy to defend a way of life that never allowed his true self to be present. In everyday life, many people are doing something similar without realizing it. They devote themselves to becoming the child who never disappoints their parents, the partner who always gives way, or the successful person who is never allowed to feel tired. These roles may once have helped them find direction and build a stable life. But when all their vitality is permitted to flow in only one direction, the remaining parts within them gradually begin to dry out. We may still achieve what society admires, yet feel that we are not truly present in the life we are living. Psychological energy can be imagined as sunlight entering a house through many windows. The room whose windows are opened will receive the light and become warm and alive. The room that remains closed for too long will gradually grow cold, even though the sun outside has never disappeared. The energy within us works in the same way. Whatever receives our attention, time, and emotion will continue to grow. If most of the light is devoted to proving our worth, meeting expectations, or protecting an image, our more authentic needs will be forced to remain in darkness. Eventually, emptiness appears, not because our vitality is gone, but because it has never been allowed to reach the places that truly need it. From a psychological perspective, people tend to be more resilient when they experience meaning and a sense of choice in what they do. We can endure a difficult journey when we know where we are going and why it matters. By contrast, even a job that is not especially demanding can exhaust us when we must fight against our own emotions every day. Exhaustion, therefore, does not arise only from the weight of responsibility, but also from the distance between our external life and what we genuinely value within. However, listening to psychological energy does not mean following every passing impulse. There are days when we are tired simply because we have not slept enough, and there are periods when work becomes boring but still needs to be completed. What must be recognized is not a fleeting emotion, but a direction of movement that continues to repeat over time, where one must give up. Psychological energy is not a temporary feeling in which we move forward today because we feel inspired, then leave tomorrow because we are bored. A meaningful relationship still includes tiring days. A suitable job still contains dull responsibilities. A right path still requires discipline. What must be recognized is the difference between the exhaustion of growth and the exhaustion of continually betraying what we value. One kind of tiredness needs rest so we can continue. The other requires us to look honestly at the direction in which we are going. If we cannot distinguish between them, we may hastily abandon what deserves to be preserved, or use discipline to prolong a life that is gradually losing its vitality. Many people feel exhausted not because they have no energy, but because their energy is being divided among too many inner conflicts. They want to change, but they also want every form of security to remain untouched. They want to live truthfully, yet still try to please everyone. They pursue a goal that no longer carries meaning, but are afraid to let it go because they fear the previous years will have been wasted. In this way, Most of their strength is not used to move forward, but to pull themselves in two opposing directions. As we gradually understand what is truly worthy of our energy, life may not immediately become easier, but the inner world becomes less divided. We no longer have to push ourselves forward through fear as often as before, because a deeper meaning has begun to quietly support each choice. Understanding psychological energy is not meant to make us rush into changing our lives. It is meant to help us recognize what we are spending our strength on each day. All you need to do is choose the one thing that has occupied your mind most during this period. Then write down the feeling that appears after you do it. If you feel lighter and have more strength to continue, that may be where your energy is being nourished. If you repeatedly feel heavy and depleted, it may be a sign that you need to reconsider how you are investing your energy in that area. Sometimes life does not need another new goal or a perfect plan. What we need first is simply to recognize where our vitality is flowing. When energy is placed where it holds genuine meaning, it quietly becomes the force that supports every choice that follows. And perhaps that is also the moment when you no longer have to keep forcing yourself to move forward, because what you are moving toward begins to gently draw you ahead. Number 3. Introversion, extraversion, and two different ways of living. The moment we recognize where psychological energy is flowing, we also begin to understand why each person finds vitality in a different way. Some people become clearer when they can act, speak, and engage with the external world. Others need to step back into a quiet space to organize what has just taken place within them. Jung called these two directions extraversion and introversion. They do not simply distinguish people who enjoy crowds from those who prefer solitude. They reveal where a person's psyche naturally turns in order to receive experience and regain balance. I remember once meeting a middle-aged man during a group sharing session. From the outside, he was the kind of person almost anyone would easily assume was highly extroverted. He initiated conversations, responded openly, and had a natural ability to make people he had just met feel comfortable. Throughout the session, he spoke about his experiences in an easy, natural voice, and occasionally made the entire room laugh. Yet when the break began, while everyone else continued talking, he quietly walked to the end of the hallway, chose an empty chair, and sat by himself. He said that he simply needed a few minutes in which he did not have to respond to anyone. For many years, because people had always seen him as lively and sociable, he believed he had to preserve that image in every situation. He accepted almost every invitation, tried to keep the atmosphere pleasant, and rarely allowed himself to leave before others did. But after days like these, he often returned home completely drained, unable to tolerate any more sound, and sometimes became irritable with the people closest to him. This did not mean that he disliked people. He had simply given too much of his attention to the external world without allowing his mind enough time to return to itself. This experience shows that external behavior does not always accurately reflect a person's psychological orientation. Someone who communicates fluently may still be more introverted because speaking is a skill they have developed, while recovery comes through time alone. Conversely, someone who speaks very little is not necessarily introverted. They may be anxious, may not yet feel safe, or may simply not have found an environment in which they feel comfortable opening up. For this reason, Jung did not determine introversion and extraversion by the number of friends a person had, how lively they appeared, or how frequently they entered crowded spaces. What mattered more was how they received experience and where their psyche naturally returned in order to regain balance. A person with an extroverted orientation tends to direct more attention toward people, events, and what is taking place in external reality. They are inclined to understand themselves through action, interaction, and the responses they receive from life. An idea may become clear only after they have spoken it aloud. An emotion may be recognized only when it is shared with another person. Rather than thinking for a long time before entering an experience, they often enter first and gradually discover the answer along the way. This does not mean that they are superficial or lack an inner life. Their psyche simply tends to move more strongly through direct contact with the world. A person with an introverted orientation tends to pay more attention to how an event is reflected within them. They do not merely register what happened, they also need to understand what emotion the experience awakened, what memory it touched, and what meaning it carried. Because of this, they may need more time before responding or making a choice. That slowness does not necessarily come from indecision. Sometimes, an invisible process of inner organization is taking place. A short sentence may remain in their mind for a very long time, while an apparently ordinary event may open many layers of thought long after it has ended. These two orientations can be imagined as two people entering the same museum. One is immediately drawn to the spacious environment, the arrangement of the paintings, and the movement of people passing through. The other tends to remain longer before a single work, noticing a small detail and the feeling it quietly awakens within. Both are engaging with the same place, but their attention naturally settles on different things. Neither way of seeing is deeper or more correct. The difference becomes difficult only when someone forces themselves to experience life in another person's way and begins to see their own natural rhythm as a flaw. However, understanding one's dominant orientation does not mean turning it into a fixed limitation. Introverted people still need to step outward to test their thoughts against reality, express their needs, and allow others to truly know them. If every feeling remains within, they may gradually mistake their own interpretation for the whole truth. Extroverted people also need pauses in order to distinguish what they genuinely desire from what the environment is encouraging them to pursue. If they are always following external movement, they may live very busy lives while remaining unable to understand why they feel increasingly empty inside. The less familiar side is not something to eliminate. It is a capacity that needs to be developed so that a person does not become trapped in a single way of living. Jung once said, "There is no such thing as a pure extrovert or a pure introvert. Such a man would be in the lunatic asylum." This somewhat humorous statement reminds us that no one is entirely directed outward or entirely turned inward. Both capacities exist within every person, although one side usually feels more natural and develops more clearly. There are times when someone who is naturally introverted needs to step outward, act, and allow reality to correct their inner thoughts. There are also times when someone who is naturally extroverted must stop, endure the quiet, and listen to what cannot be answered through one more conversation. Understanding whether we are introverted or extroverted is therefore not about finding a label and using it to explain every choice. What matters more is recognizing when we need connection, and when we need to return inward. On some days, a sincere meeting can help free us from thoughts that have closed around us. On other days, the healthiest choice may be to reduce the noise, decline an invitation, and give the mind enough time to become clear. When we learn to respect this rhythm, we no longer have to prove that we are more sociable, more profound, or more similar to the majority. We can enter the world without losing ourselves, and we can be alone without closing the door on life. If this section has helped you understand more clearly how you regain your energy, share your thoughts in the comments. You can speak about the moments when you need to be among other people, or the moments when you simply want to return to a quiet space of your own. Sometimes one honest reflection is enough to help someone else realize that they are not difficult or unusual. They are simply living according to a different psychological rhythm and need to learn how to respect it. Number 4. The 4 psychological functions that shape how we see the world. Once we understand that each person directs psychological energy in a different way, we also begin to recognize why 2 people can face the same event and see entirely different things. One person immediately notices what is happening before them. Another thinks about what the situation might become. One person wants to find the most logical solution, while another is concerned with how the choice will affect the people involved. According to Jung, these familiar differences arise from 4 psychological functions: sensation, intuition, thinking, and feeling. Sensation can be understood simply as the ability to see clearly what is actually present. In life, this is the part that helps us recognize that someone has repeatedly broken their promises, even though their words remain gentle. It helps us notice that the body is exhausted, that a room has become suffocating, or that a plan lacks the most basic conditions. Sensation does not ask too many questions about the distant future. It brings us back to the present and says, before explaining everything, look carefully at what is actually happening. This function is like the feet touching the ground. Through it, we know whether the place on which we are standing is stable. Someone may promise that they will change, but sensation remembers the actions that have repeatedly occurred. A job may sound very attractive, but sensation recognizes that its schedule is causing us to lose sleep and leaving us no time to live. Sometimes, we suffer not because we do not know the truth, but because we have seen it very clearly and still try to interpret it in a more comforting way. Intuition, by contrast, turns its gaze toward what has not yet appeared. It helps us look at a small event and sense a greater possibility hidden within it. A person may hear an idea that is still awkward and incomplete, yet recognize that it could grow into something valuable. They may also feel that a period of life is gradually coming to an end, even though no clear external event has taken place. Intuition does not always provide an immediate or complete explanation. It simply creates the feeling that another direction is quietly beginning to emerge. If sensation is the foot touching the earth, intuition is the gaze directed toward the horizon. It helps us avoid becoming trapped by what the present currently permits. Yet that gaze can also carry us too far. We may see so much potential in someone that we forget how they are actually treating us. We may fall in love with a beautiful future without ever preparing the small steps needed to reach it. For this reason, intuition needs sensation to preserve contact with reality, just as a dream needs solid ground before it can become a path. Thinking helps us organize what we see. When a problem becomes confusing, this function searches for causes, compares choices, and considers what is genuinely reasonable. For example, someone may want to leave a job because they are exhausted. Thinking will help them examine their income, savings, other opportunities, and the consequences of each option. It does not necessarily tell them that they must stay or leave. It simply makes the problem clearer, instead of allowing a temporary emotion to decide their entire future. Thinking is like a map spread out before us. It shows us which road is shorter, where obstacles may appear, and where each choice may lead. In a relationship, we may still be in love, but thinking helps us look back at what has happened over time, which problems continually return, which promises have never become actions, and whether both people are genuinely trying to change. Mature reason does not make the heart cold. It simply refuses to allow one beautiful moment to conceal a harmful pattern. Feeling helps us recognize what is genuinely important to us. In Jung's psychology, feeling does not merely refer to happiness, sadness, or emotional sensitivity. It is the way the mind evaluates the value of something. A choice may be perfectly reasonable in financial terms, yet leave us feeling that we are betraying something profound within ourselves. Another decision may require us to accept a disadvantage in the present, yet still feel right because it protects our self-respect or something we deeply cherish. If thinking is the map, feeling is the compass. A map may show us which road is fastest, but a compass helps us recognize whether we are still moving in the right direction. Someone may be offered a better job, a higher salary, and a more attractive position. Thinking sees the obvious benefits, but feeling may recognize that the environment requires them to live against what they believe. This does not mean that feeling is always correct. It simply reminds us that a good decision must not only be reasonable, but must also be something we can live with without continually betraying ourselves. Jung once compared these 4 functions to the 4 points of a compass. Sensation tells us what is present. Thinking helps us recognize what it means. Feeling tells us what value it carries. Intuition opens our awareness to the possibilities ahead. No function can completely replace another, because each one illuminates a different part of the same experience. Difficulty begins when we trust only the way of seeing that is most familiar to us. Someone who relies on thinking may believe that another person's feelings are irrational. Someone who depends heavily on feeling may reject the truth simply because it is painful. Someone who trusts sensation may accept only what can already be seen, while someone who lives through intuition may chase too many possibilities without ever completing anything concrete. We are not wrong for having one function that is stronger. We merely become one-sided when we use it to explain everything. During an argument, each person often notices something different. One person focuses on what actually happened, while another is concerned with the emotion that was hurt, or with the consequences that may follow. Because of this, both people may have a valid point and still fail to understand each other. What matters is not immediately proving who is right, but recognizing that our own perspective reflects only one part of the story. Psychological maturity does not mean that we must use all 4 functions equally and perfectly. That is almost impossible. It simply means that before making an important choice, we know how to slow down and look from the perspectives we usually overlook. What is actually happening? Where could this lead? Which choice is reasonable? And what truly holds value for me? These 4 simple questions alone may prevent us from making a decision out of haste or from a familiar blind spot. The 4 psychological functions are like 4 windows looking out upon the same sky. Each window gives us a distinct perspective, but no single window can contain the entire sky. What we see is not wrong, it is simply incomplete. And sometimes the most important step in psychological growth is not looking more intensely through the window we already know, but becoming open enough to move toward another one, where a part of the truth we once overlooked is quietly waiting to be seen. Number 5. Complexes and reactions beyond conscious awareness. It is here that we recognize that human beings do not always respond from the clearest and most conscious part of themselves. A mild suggestion can make us defensive. A brief delay can make us believe we are about to be abandoned, and one cold look can be enough to make us feel disrespected. The reaction appears too quickly and is often far stronger than what has just occurred. By the time we calm down, we may not understand why we spoke or acted that way. For Jung, this is often the moment when an unconscious complex has been awakened. A complex can be understood as a group of memories, emotions, and beliefs gathered around an old wound. It does not always begin with one major event. It may form through repeated experiences of being compared, overlooked, acknowledged only when we achieve good results, or having to constantly observe the moods of others in order to remain safe. These experiences gradually create a sensitive point within us. Later, whenever the present contains a familiar signal, the entire emotional world of the past may return before we have time to realize that the circumstances are now different. This can be clearly seen in the Greek myth of the goddess Eris. Because she was not invited to the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, she threw a golden apple into the celebration bearing the inscription, "For the fairest." Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite immediately began competing for it because none of them wanted to become the one who was not chosen. One small object eventually became a link in the chain of events that led to the Trojan War. Yet the apple did not create pride, rivalry, or the need for recognition. It merely touched what was already present within those involved. The complex operates in the same way. The present event is only the trigger. The force of the reaction comes from emotions that have accumulated over a long period of time. Jung once wrote, "Everyone knows nowadays that people have complexes. What is not so well known, though far more important theoretically, is that complexes can have us. We often think of a complex as merely a weakness we carry. But Jung emphasized that when a complex is activated, it can temporarily take possession of the way we see, think, and act. A specific comment suddenly becomes proof that we will never be good enough. A minor disagreement turns into the feeling that we are not respected at all. One rejection seems to confirm that we will never be chosen. In that moment, the present becomes narrow, while the past expands until it obscures what is actually taking place. Consider a woman who is normally calm and cooperative. During a meeting, her manager asks her to revise a section of work that is not clear enough. The feedback is delivered in an ordinary manner, but she immediately becomes tense, begins explaining herself repeatedly, and remains silent for the rest of the meeting. That evening, she can still remember every expression in the room and feels ashamed, as though her competence has been denied in front of everyone. Only when she looks more deeply does she recognize that the reaction did not begin in the meeting. When she was young, every mistake she made was often compared with the achievements of her older sister, who consistently performed better. Gradually, she came to associate making a mistake with being inferior and unworthy of recognition. Therefore, the mature part of her understands that this is only professional feedback, while the older part hears a familiar message, "I am still the one who will never be good enough." A new situation has unintentionally reopened an old meaning before she has had the opportunity to see it with the full awareness of the present. A scientific perspective helps us understand why this reaction can happen so quickly. Experiences associated with fear, shame, or pain often leave powerful traces in emotional memory. When a similar signal appears, the body may immediately enter a state of self-protection. The heart beats faster, the muscles tighten, attention narrows, and the mind begins searching for signs that confirm the danger is returning. For this reason, we may know rationally that the present situation is not especially serious and still be unable to calm down immediately. The reaction is not taking place only in our thoughts. It is also present in the body and in the impulse to withdraw, attack, or prove that we are right. A complex can be imagined as an old ink stain buried beneath many layers of paper. Under ordinary circumstances, it is almost impossible to see. But when a drop of water falls on exactly that place, the ink begins to spread upward and color the page of the present. We no longer see only the feedback, the delay, or the rejection. Everything seems to carry the color of what once caused us pain. The problem is not that the stain once existed. The problem is that we fail to recognize how it is changing the way we read the story before us. However, recognizing a complex does not mean denying every genuine injury in the present. Some words are truly disrespectful, some relationships are genuinely unstable, and some boundaries need to be protected. What matters is distinguishing between the event that is actually taking place and the additional meaning that the past is placing upon it. When an emotion becomes too intense or lasts for too long, we can slow down and ask ourselves, what has actually happened? How am I interpreting it? And what am I most afraid of at this moment? Even a pause like this can help consciousness return, so that we do not act entirely from the part of ourselves that has been wounded. For this reason, the goal is not to erase every complex or force ourselves never to react strongly again. A complex often points toward a place within us where something remains misunderstood. Anger may be protecting the part of us that was once disregarded. The need for control may have formed from a fear of chaos. Jealousy may sometimes reveal a desire we have never dared to acknowledge. When we only judge the reaction, we try to force it to disappear. But when we become calm enough to listen, we begin to recognize what it is protecting and find a more mature way to meet that need. Understanding a complex is not meant to excuse hurting other people, but to reclaim responsibility for our inner world. The past may explain why we have become sensitive to certain situations, but the present still requires us to choose how we respond. We can still feel sad when someone becomes distant, without immediately treating it as proof that we are unworthy of love. We can still feel uncomfortable when receiving feedback without turning one mistake into a judgment of our entire worth. Maturity does not mean that old reactions will completely disappear. It begins when we recognize that the first emotion is only a signal that needs to be heard. not the whole truth, and certainly not a voice with the right to decide on our behalf. Number 6. Persona and the mask we wear before the world. And as we look more deeply into the quiet forces that shape our lives, we also begin to notice another kind of distance, the distance between who we truly are within and the image we present to the world. At work, we may appear confident even while carrying many uncertainties. With our family, we try to remain calm so those we love can feel at ease. Among friends, we keep smiling even when we are already exhausted inside. Jung called this social face the persona, the mask that helps us adapt to the world and find our place among other people. Persona is not the same as being fake. We cannot appear before our colleagues exactly as we do when we are alone, nor can we reveal every private part of ourselves to everyone we meet. A doctor needs to remain composed in front of patients. A manager needs to speak with clarity when a team has lost its direction. A father may set aside his own worries for a while to give his child a sense of safety. These roles are necessary because they allow people to live together without letting every private emotion spill into every situation. The problem begins only when the mask is no longer something we consciously choose to wear, but gradually becomes the only face we believe we are allowed to have. Jung once wrote, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is." This statement does not deny the value of the persona. It simply reminds us that the image others see, and even the image we have become accustomed to believing about ourselves, has never been the whole of who we are. The persona is often formed around the qualities that once earned us acceptance. A child praised for always being well-behaved may grow into an adult who never dares to disappoint anyone. Someone who received attention only through achievement may come to believe that they must always excel in order to deserve respect. A person who was criticized for being too sensitive may learn to hide their sadness so well that they eventually appear before everyone as though nothing could ever hurt them. One of the viewers of this channel once left a comment sharing that, within his family, he always played the role of a strong and dependable husband. Whenever bills needed to be paid, something in the house broke, or the children ran into problems, he was usually the first person to step forward and handle everything. In front of his wife, he rarely spoke about the pressure he was under at work, because he believed his responsibility was to make her feel safe, not to bring more worries home. Every time she asked whether something was wrong, he simply smiled and said he was just a little tired. Over time, the image of the husband who was always steady became so familiar that the whole family came to believe he could endure everything without ever needing support himself. But in that same comment, he admitted that there were evenings when he had already driven home, parked in front of the house, yet remained sitting in the car for a very long time, unable to bring himself to walk inside. It was not because he wanted to leave his family, nor because his love for his wife had changed. He simply no longer had the strength to continue appearing as the man who always knew what to do. There were moments when he wanted to say that work was draining him, that he was afraid of failing, and that he was no longer certain he could keep carrying everything on his shoulders. Yet every time he was about to speak, he feared that his wife would feel disappointed or no longer feel safe with him. So he continued wearing the calm expression, never realizing that the mask of the strong husband had prevented the person closest to him from seeing the human being behind the role, the one who quietly longed to be understood. The persona is like the introduction printed on the cover of a book. It tells others a few important things: what work we do, what roles we hold, how we usually behave, and what we may bring into a relationship. That introduction is useful, but it can never tell the whole story hidden inside. It says nothing about the pages we still do not understand, the passages that were crossed out long ago, the fears we have never named, or the desires that have never been given the chance to emerge. The difficulty begins when we spend so long reading only the words on the cover that we forget our lives are far greater than the image being presented. When we become too closely identified with the persona, many people may admire us, yet we still feel that no one truly knows who we are. Compliments about our strength, dedication, or success may bring us joy, but they also quietly create more pressure to preserve that same image. We begin avoiding situations that might make us appear vulnerable, refusing to admit what we do not know, and hiding needs that seem incompatible with the role we have become known for. The loneliness we experience at that point does not come from having no one beside us, but from the feeling that the person being seen is only a carefully edited version of ourselves, one designed to be easier to accept. Recognizing the persona does not mean throwing away every role or revealing every private part of your life to everyone around you. Not everyone is close enough to enter the deepest places within you, and not every emotion needs to be expressed in every circumstance. What matters more is knowing which mask you are wearing, how it has protected you, and what it has required you to hide. You can remain professional without turning your work into the measure of your entire worth. You can care for others without believing that you deserve love only when you are constantly useful. You can remain strong without denying the days when you too need someone to support you. Perhaps you do not need to change anything dramatic just yet. Simply take a quiet moment and think about the image you work hardest to maintain in front of others. Perhaps it is the person who is always fine, the one who never disappoints anyone, the one who must always succeed, or the one who always knows how to solve every problem. Gently ask yourself, how has this image protected me, and what part of myself have I had to hide in order to maintain it? Do not rush to blame yourself for wearing that mask. At one point in your life, it may have been the very thing that helped you feel safe, accepted, or capable of surviving a difficult season. Then choose one person with whom you genuinely feel safe, and allow yourself to be just a little more honest. You do not have to reveal everything you have been carrying. It may be as simple as admitting that you feel tired today, saying that you do not have the answer yet, or declining a request that is beyond your capacity. It is through these small moments that we begin to realize we can still be loved, even when we do not appear in our most perfect version. The persona may help us step into the world, but it should never become the only place where we are allowed to exist. Behind every role remains a much larger human being, someone with limits, needs, contradictions, and possibilities that have not yet been seen. When we understand that the mask is only the way we appear, not the entirety of who we are, we no longer need to fight against the world in order to live authentically. We simply learn to step into each role without losing the path that leads us back to ourselves. Number 7. shadow, and the part of ourselves we always try to hide. So if the mask we wear before the world is only the part of ourselves we want others to see, then where do the rest of us remain? Perhaps every one of us has experienced a moment like this. We suddenly feel irritated with someone, even though they have done nothing wrong. We react intensely to something very small, or the instant a certain emotion appears, we rush to deny it. I'm not jealous. I'm not angry. I'm not the kind of person who is selfish. As we grow older, we become increasingly skilled at preserving a positive image of ourselves. Yet because of that very effort, certain parts of who we are gradually pushed into the shadows, simply because we believe they should not exist. Jung once wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." He was not saying that the shadow is the evil part of human nature. What Jung wanted to emphasize is that anything we refuse to recognize as our own can become part of the shadow. A denied emotion does not disappear. It simply leaves the light of consciousness and continues existing in silence. The harder we try to prove that we could never feel a certain emotion, the more easily that very emotion may begin guiding our lives without our awareness. The shadow is rarely created by dramatic events. More often it grows through countless ordinary moments. A child who is scolded for expressing anger may grow up believing that anger is shameful. Someone who was criticized for drawing attention to themselves may gradually learn to hide every achievement. A single experience of being rejected for being different may be enough to make someone decide never to reveal that part of themselves again. As the years pass, these hidden qualities no longer belong to the image we hold of ourselves. Yet they have never truly disappeared. You can easily see this in a group of friends. Sometimes there is one person who always feels uncomfortable whenever someone openly shares their happiness. The moment another friend posts a photo after achieving a goal, talks about an exciting trip, or happily mentions finally accomplishing something they worked hard for, they immediately assume that person is seeking attention or showing off. What is remarkable is that this feeling of irritation often lingers far longer than the event itself. If we look more deeply, perhaps that person has spent their life living in a completely different way. Whenever they received praise, they brushed it aside. Whenever they accomplished something meaningful, they hesitated to share it because they feared being judged. They have spent years shrinking their own joy until they have forgotten that taking pride in one's efforts is perfectly natural. So each time they see someone else comfortably doing what they have never allowed themselves to do, a forgotten part within quietly begins to stir. What provokes such a strong reaction is often not the person standing before them, but the part of themselves they abandoned long ago. This is what Jung called projection. So many times in life, we do not see other people as they truly are. We see them through the parts of ourselves we have not yet faced. The person who is constantly irritated by someone else's decisiveness may never have allowed themselves to say no. The person who cannot tolerate another person's vulnerability may have spent a lifetime hiding their own wounds. The one who continually criticizes others for wanting recognition may also carry within themselves a deep longing to be seen, a longing they have never dared to acknowledge. What is especially important to notice is that the shadow does not contain only the qualities we consider negative. sometimes our most beautiful qualities are hidden there as well. Some people bury their creativity because they were once told they were unrealistic. Others hide their strength because they fear being seen as too harsh. Some abandon their ability to set healthy boundaries simply to become easier to love. The shadow, therefore, is not merely a place where darkness is stored. It also safeguards many of the precious parts of ourselves that we sacrificed in order to be accepted. Yet Jung also emphasized that the purpose of recognizing the shadow is not to act on every emotion we experience. Anger is not meant to be poured onto another person. Jealousy is not an excuse to diminish someone else. What matters is that once an emotion is brought into the light of consciousness, it no longer guides us from the shadows. We begin to see what is truly happening within us, and we gain the freedom to choose our response instead of merely repeating old patterns. The shadow is like a room in a house that has remained locked for many years. We closed that door because we believed whatever was inside was too messy, too shameful, or too difficult to accept. Yet locking the door does not mean the room no longer exists. It remains there, quietly influencing the entire house. Only when we gather the courage to open the door and step inside do we discover that it contains not only dust and forgotten belongings. It also holds many things that were once precious, things we unintentionally left behind simply because, at some point, we came to believe we were no longer allowed to carry them with us. Perhaps this is why encountering the shadow is always one of the most difficult experiences in the journey toward maturity. No one easily accepts that they too can feel envy, vulnerability, the desire for recognition, or the wish to put themselves first. Yet it is precisely when we stop trying to become the perfect person of our imagination that we begin becoming a genuine human being. We no longer spend enormous amounts of energy hiding the parts of ourselves we fear others might see. Instead, we learn to understand them, take responsibility for them, and gradually allow them to find their rightful place in our lives. Perhaps becoming familiar with the shadow does not begin with dramatic changes. It begins with a very small pause. Whenever someone causes you to react more intensely than usual, do not rush to judge them or force the feeling away. Simply stay with it for a little longer and observe it quietly. Sometimes the very reactions we are most eager to dismiss are silently leading us back to a forgotten part of ourselves. And when that part is finally seen with honesty instead of judgment, the shadow gradually loses its power to unconsciously direct our lives. And before we continue this journey, thank you for staying with me this far. Take a quiet moment and answer honestly. When was the last time you recognized a part of yourself that you have always tried to hide? Perhaps it was an anger you immediately denied, a moment of jealousy that filled you with shame, or simply a longing you have always kept to yourself. If you feel ready, share your story in the comments below. Perhaps the very moment you give a name to the forgotten part of yourself will also become the first step toward freeing your shadow from silently shaping your life. Number 8. Anima, Animus, and the mysterious inner opposite. When the parts of ourselves that were once rejected no longer have to remain hidden in the shadows, we also begin to realize that the journey toward wholeness does not end there. Beneath both the persona and the shadow, every human being carries another quiet opposite within, one that patiently waits to be encountered before the soul can truly find balance. Carl Jung called these inner opposites Anima and Animus. There is something fascinating about life that almost everyone has experienced. Sometimes we meet someone and feel an immediate attraction, even though we barely know who they are. Some relationships begin with the feeling that we have finally found the person we have been waiting for all along. We believe they understand us better than anyone else and bring us a sense of peace we have never known before. Yet as time passes and the initial glow gradually fades, we are surprised to discover that they are not entirely the person we once believed them to be. What changes is not necessarily the other person. What changes is the unconscious layer we unknowingly projected onto them, a layer that is slowly being lifted away. Jung believed that within every man there exists an unconscious feminine image, which he called the Anima. Within every woman there also exists an unconscious masculine image, known as the Animus. This is not about biological sex, nor is it a suggestion that men should become more feminine or women more masculine. What Jung meant is that the human soul is never made up of only one side. Within each of us live complementary qualities that are meant to balance one another. When one side develops too strongly while the other is neglected, we naturally begin searching for that missing balance in another person instead of cultivating it within ourselves. This is what makes so many encounters in life feel extraordinary. We believe we are falling in love with another person, yet very often what truly moves our hearts is the image they awaken within us. A man may be deeply drawn to a woman's gentleness, her ability to listen, or her profound intuition because he has never allowed himself to live with those qualities. A woman may admire a man's calmness, decisiveness, and inner steadiness because these are also the qualities she is still searching for within herself. For that reason, the powerful attraction in many relationships does not arise solely from the other person. It also comes from the part of ourselves that has long been waiting to become whole. This idea is beautifully reflected in the story of Jesus meeting the Samaritan woman at the well. That woman had gone through many marriages, yet she never found lasting peace. Each time she hoped that another relationship would fill the emptiness within her, she eventually found herself walking away with the same unquenched thirst. Only when she encountered Jesus was she reminded that what she had been seeking for so long could never be filled by another human being. The deepest thirst lives within the soul, and only by returning to oneself can a person discover the living water that no longer depends on anyone outside themselves. Carl Jung once wrote, "Every man carries within him the eternal image of woman, not the image of this or that particular woman, but a definite feminine image." This statement is not about any particular woman. It speaks of an unconscious image that has lived within the human soul for a very long time. That image influences whom we are attracted to, what we expect from love, and even the disappointments that continue repeating throughout our relationships. Very often, what we pursue is not entirely the other person themselves, but the inner image that they happen to reflect back to us. It is much like a compass that quietly points toward the true north. No matter how many directions the person holding it turns, the needle patiently finds its way back to where it naturally belongs. The human soul works in much the same way. No matter how many people we meet or how many relationships we experience, there remains a profound inner force guiding us back toward the opposite qualities that are still missing within ourselves. If we fail to recognize this, we may spend our lives believing we are simply searching for the right person. But once we understand what Jung meant, we begin to see that every meaningful encounter is first and foremost leading us back to ourselves. Yet the most important part of Jung's insight is not explaining why we are attracted to certain people. What he truly wanted to reveal is that no human being can become whole while continuing to assign someone else the task of completing the missing parts of their own soul. A person may enter our lives and awaken courage, tenderness, or the capacity to love that we never knew we possessed. But they cannot live those qualities on our behalf. If all of our peace depends on whether that person stays or leaves, then what we are holding on to is not maturity, but an extraordinarily subtle form of dependence. Perhaps this is why the deepest purpose of the Anima and Animus is not to send us searching for our other half. They are like the two banks of a river. When we stand on only one side, we always feel that the opposite shore is where we truly belong. Yet only when a bridge is built do both banks become part of the same flowing river. The human soul is no different. Gentleness needs the support of inner strength. Reason must learn to listen to emotion. Strength must walk alongside compassion. Only when these seemingly opposite qualities begin meeting within us do we stop searching for in others what we have never allowed ourselves to develop. This is also why the most important relationships in our lives bring not only happiness, but also profound challenges. Some people teach us how to open our hearts. Others force us to face our fear of abandonment. Some enter our lives simply to reflect back a part of ourselves that we have spent years avoiding. From this perspective, every meaningful encounter becomes a mirror. It does not appear to tell us who the other person is. It appears so that we may discover what we still do not understand about ourselves. And perhaps that is the most beautiful message Jung wished to leave us with. One day we may realize that the person who changed our lives was not necessarily the one who stayed forever, but the one who unknowingly awakened a part of our soul that had long been asleep. As that inner opposite is gradually embraced and nurtured through our own conscious awareness, we no longer love simply because we want someone to fill an emptiness within us. We love from the place of a person who has become more whole, because in the end, the deepest journey of searching for another has always been the journey of returning to ourselves. Number 9. Archetypes and humanity's ancient patterns. When the Anima and Animus help us recognize the parts of ourselves that have long been missing, the journey into the unconscious does not end there. As Jung ventured even deeper, he discovered that beneath each person's unique experiences lies a much greater psychological realm, one that preserves patterns that have accompanied humanity since the beginning of time. He called these patterns archetypes, primordial forms that continue to quietly appear in dreams, myths, and the defining turning points of our lives. Jung once said, "The archetype is a tendency to form such representations of a motif, representations that can vary a great deal in detail without losing their basic pattern." According to Jung, archetypes are not memories passed down from one generation to another. Rather, they are innate psychological tendencies that exist within the collective unconscious. This is why people living in completely different cultures and historical periods can still create remarkably similar stories about the hero, the mother, the guide, or the journey through darkness. The outward forms may differ, yet the underlying psychological structure remains the same. During a Jungian-oriented therapy session, I once met a 30-year-old man. He had spent nearly 10 years working in the same field of finance. His income was stable, his work was familiar, and everyone around him believed he had the kind of life most people would envy. Yet the longer he stayed, the more he felt as though he were living the same day over and over again. He was not exactly burned out, nor had any particular crisis occurred. But somewhere inside, his vitality was slowly fading away. What confused him most was the persistent feeling that some part of himself was running dry, even though he could not identify what was missing. For many months, he repeatedly dreamed that he was standing in an empty train station, holding a ticket in his hand, but unable to see the destination written on it. Every time a train arrived and its doors opened, he would walk toward it, only to step back at the last moment because he was afraid of boarding the wrong train. Then the train would leave, and he would wake with a deep sense of regret, as though he had just missed something profoundly important without being able to name it. From Jung's perspective, this dream was not simply telling him to quit his job. It pointed toward the hero archetype, the pattern that often awakens when a person has reached the limits of an old stage of life and begins hearing the invitation to step into the unknown. The train did not necessarily symbolize another career. It could represent a more authentic way of living, a choice he had long postponed, or a part of himself that had been waiting for years to step beyond the familiar life he had always known. In Jung's thought, the hero is not someone who always triumphs or accomplishes extraordinary feats. Above all, the hero is the person who dares to leave behind what is familiar in order to face the unknown within themselves. The greatest challenge is not always changing careers or starting over somewhere else. Sometimes it is letting go of the image of the person we once believed we had to become. Someone may have spent years living as the strong one, the rescuer, the person who never disappoints anyone, or the one who always makes the sensible choice. Those roles may once have helped them grow, but eventually they can also become their limits. That is why the appearance of an archetype is often accompanied by uneasiness. One part of us longs to move forward, while another desperately clings to the old sense of safety. We may feel guilty for no longer being satisfied with what we once wanted, or begin doubting ourselves simply because we cannot yet see where the new path will lead. Yet from Jung's perspective, this uneasiness is not always a sign that we are moving in the wrong direction. Sometimes, it simply reveals that the old psychological structure is no longer spacious enough to contain the person who is quietly emerging within. You might imagine an archetype as an underground stream flowing beneath a vast forest. Above the ground, each person walks a different path, meets different people, and tells a unique story about their life. Yet beneath the surface, the water continues to flow along channels that have existed for ages. We cannot see that current with our eyes, but we can sense it through recurring symbols, unforgettable dreams, emotions that feel larger than the circumstances themselves, or the quiet feeling that something deep within is guiding us. At different stages of life, different archetypes may come forward. At one moment, we may need the courage of the hero to leave behind what is familiar. At another, the mother archetype may emerge through the need for care, rest, and a return to inner safety. The guide archetype may appear through a mentor, a book, or an unexpected insight that suddenly illuminates the path ahead. The archetype of death and rebirth often emerges during periods when an old identity is dissolving, leaving us feeling lost before a new way of being gradually takes shape. However, archetypes do not only offer guidance. When one pattern takes hold of the psyche too powerfully, we may unconsciously identify ourselves with it. Someone consumed by the rescuer archetype may constantly feel responsible for solving everyone else's problems, even when they themselves are completely exhausted. A person identified with the hero archetype may continually seek conflict or challenge simply to prove their worth. At that point, we are no longer using the energy of the archetype consciously. Instead, it is quietly directing our choices from beneath the surface. What Jung wanted us to do was not become a particular archetype, but recognize which pattern is being awakened during each stage of our lives. Which role are we repeatedly stepping into? The rescuer, the abandoned one, the warrior, or the one who is always waiting for someone else to lead the way? These questions help us recognize that behind many choices that seem completely accidental, there may exist a much deeper story that we have been unconsciously repeating. Recognizing an archetype also does not mean turning every dream or life event into some mysterious sign. What matters more is paying attention to what continually returns within our psychological life. Which symbols appear again and again? Which situations provoke reactions far stronger than they seem to deserve? What kinds of people or journeys repeatedly draw us in? When a particular image, emotion, or pattern continues returning over time, it may be revealing a part of the soul that longs to be seen and developed. Perhaps this is why at many moments in life, the uneasiness we feel does not truly come from our external circumstances. It comes from sensing that we have outgrown the old form of our lives, while still lacking the courage to step into a new one. What once brought safety begins to feel confining. The role that once earned us recognition gradually pulls us farther away from ourselves. One part of us longs to change, while consciousness continues trying to preserve everything exactly as it is for fear of losing stability. When we look at those moments through Jung's eyes, we no longer rush to interpret them as signs of failure. Sometimes feeling confined simply means that the soul needs a wider space in which to continue growing. A new chapter may not begin with a clear answer, but with a recurring dream, an inner longing that refuses to disappear, or the unmistakable feeling that we can no longer continue living as we once did. In those moments, perhaps an archetype is quietly awakening, not to decide who we must become, but to remind us that a deeper part of ourselves has been waiting for the chance to truly live. Number 10. Dreams and messages from the unconscious. If archetypes are the silent patterns that shape the development of the human soul, then dreams are one of the clearest ways through which the unconscious finds its voice. According to Jung, when consciousness becomes consumed by work, responsibilities, and countless problems that demand our attention each day, the unconscious does not fall silent. Instead, it simply chooses another language, the language of images, symbols, and emotions, to remind us of what we have unknowingly overlooked or never taken the time to truly hear. Jung once wrote, "The dream is a little hidden door in the innermost and most secret recesses of the soul." To him, dreams were neither random fragments of memory accidentally produced by the brain, nor merely reflections of the events of the previous day. A dream is a dialogue between consciousness and the unconscious. It does not come to predict the future or deliver mysterious prophecies. Its purpose is to bring into the light what consciousness has not yet seen, fully understood, or been ready to acknowledge. In other words, dreams speak less about the outer world than they do about the inner world we carry within ourselves. What makes this especially fascinating is that the unconscious rarely speaks in clear words. It speaks through symbols. A house may represent one's inner psychological life. A child may symbolize the part of ourselves that longs to be nurtured. A river may reflect transformation, while a forest can represent unexplored regions of the psyche. This is precisely why Jung insisted that no dictionary could ever provide one universal interpretation for every dream. The same image may carry entirely different meanings for two different people because every symbol is deeply connected to an individual's personal history, memories, and life experiences. Several years after losing touch, I happened to meet an old university friend while having coffee one afternoon. Our conversation began casually until she mentioned that, for nearly 2 months, she had been having the same recurring dream. She kept dreaming that she had returned to her old school to take an important examination. Strangely, she always arrived on time, entered the correct classroom, and sat at the proper desk. Yet the moment she opened the exam paper, she could not read a single question. She would wake up feeling anxious, even though in her waking life, her career was stable and she was under no unusual pressure. The dream repeated itself almost exactly every night, with only a few minor details changing, while the overwhelming feeling of helplessness remained the same. At first, she dismissed it as nothing more than lingering memories from her student years. But when she reflected more carefully, she realized the dreams had begun precisely when her company invited her to take on a new managerial position. Outwardly, she smiled and confidently told everyone she was ready. Yet deep inside, she quietly wondered whether she truly had what it took to lead other people. From Jung's perspective, the dream was not predicting that she would fail. The examination was simply a symbol of entering a new stage of life, one in which a part of her still feared she was not mature enough to carry greater responsibility. This was something Jung observed repeatedly throughout his therapeutic work. Dreams do not attempt to answer the question of what we should do. They help us recognize what is genuinely taking place within us. Many fears remain hidden during the day beneath logic, self-reassurance, or constant busyness. But when night falls and consciousness grows quiet, the unconscious brings those emotions back through images. It does so not to make us more anxious, but to help us stop avoiding what we have been carrying all along. People often believe they know only what they are consciously thinking. Jung believed otherwise. He argued that we always know far more than we realize. The difference is that much of this knowledge has not yet entered consciousness. Countless emotions, intuitions, and inner conflicts continue operating beneath the surface without our awareness. Dreams are like a quiet friend who leaves a letter outside our front door every night. We may choose to open it, or we may ignore it. The letter does not force itself upon us, criticize us, or disappear simply because we have not read it. It patiently returns again and again in different forms until its message has finally been heard. This also explains why many people experience the same dream repeatedly over months or even years. Some continually dream of losing their way. Others repeatedly dream of missing a train, losing something precious, or returning to a childhood home they left behind long ago. These images do not always need to be interpreted literally. What matters far more is the emotion that accompanies them. Do we feel helpless, regretful, frightened, relieved, or hopeful? Those emotions often become the key that unlocks the deeper meaning of the dream, because the unconscious is always more concerned with our psychological state than with the external event itself. You might imagine dreams as the surface of a lake reflecting the stars at night. During the day, the water is disturbed by wind, noise, and endless movement. But when everything becomes still, the stars that have always been present finally appear clearly upon its surface. The unconscious works in much the same way. The deepest truths within the soul often reveal themselves only when the noise of everyday life temporarily fades. Dreams do not create an entirely new reality. They simply reflect what has always existed within us, but what we have not yet had the opportunity or the inner calm to truly recognize. At the same time, Jung cautioned against assigning mystical significance to every dream. Not every dream carries a profound message. Some merely reflect physical exhaustion, recent experiences, or lingering impressions from the day. What truly matters is not obsessively decoding every detail, but noticing the recurring themes, images, and emotions that continue appearing over time. Rather than immediately asking, "What does this dream mean?" we might begin with gentler questions. What emotion remains after I wake up? What in my current life evokes the same feeling? Which part of myself has been asking for attention but continues to be overlooked? Perhaps that is why the greatest gift dreams offer is not the ability to see the future. They help us understand the present more deeply. When we learn to approach our dreams with curiosity rather than fear, we gradually realize that there has always been a part of us quietly trying to restore balance from within. And sometimes, what we need most is not advice from the outside world, but enough inner stillness to hear the voice that has always been there, speaking only when we are asleep. If today's reflection has encouraged you to see your dreams in a different light, consider sharing this video with someone who is also searching for the meaning hidden behind life's seemingly ordinary experiences. Perhaps a dream they once dismissed and quickly forgot is actually the first doorway leading them closer to the profound inner world where the unnamed parts of themselves have been patiently waiting to be heard. Number 11. Myth, Symbols, and the Hidden Language of the Soul. Dreams reveal that the unconscious can speak through the private life of each individual. But when those same images transcend personal experience and continue appearing in stories passed down through thousands of years, they become myths, symbols, and a hidden language that the human soul has preserved across generations. From this point, Jung expanded his exploration beyond the inner movements of a single person and began studying the timeless patterns that have quietly lived within humanity throughout history. Jung once wrote, "The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it." This statement reflects one of his deepest convictions. Human beings do not live by reason or measurable facts alone. We also live by meaning, and meaning rarely arrives in the form of dry concepts. More often it comes through images, symbols, and stories that have been handed down from one generation to the next. This is why Jung devoted many years to studying mythology, fairy tales, religion, and literature. He did not regard them as mere products of imagination, but as mirrors reflecting the deepest structure of the human psyche. What is remarkable is that people from vastly different cultures often tell stories that are astonishingly similar. The image of a hero leaving home, enduring countless trials, and returning, transformed, appears in Greek mythology, Eastern epics, European folklore, and countless other traditions around the world. These similarities do not exist because people copied one another. According to Jung, they arise from the collective unconscious, the shared psychological foundation that belongs to all humanity. When a symbol remains alive across thousands of years, it usually suggests that it touches a psychological truth far deeper than any particular culture or historical period. For this reason, Jung did not read myths in search of historical facts. He read them as though he were listening to the human soul telling its own story. Every character, every journey, and every challenge can represent an inner psychological movement. The dragon is not merely a monster. It may symbolize a fear we have never dared to confront. The forest is not simply a location. It can represent the unexplored territory of the unconscious that we continually avoid. And the treasure waiting at the end of the journey is often not gold or jewels, but a more mature version of the very person who set out on the path. This perspective is beautifully illustrated in The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. At first glance, it appears to be nothing more than the story of a young boy traveling from planet to planet and meeting unusual people. But the more carefully we read, the more we realize that every character functions as a symbol of a particular way of living. The king represents the desire for control. The drunkard is trapped in the endless cycle of shame. The businessman, endlessly counting the stars, symbolizes the pursuit of possession while forgetting the true meaning of living. The little prince's journey therefore unfolds not only across distant planets, but also through the familiar landscapes of the human soul. From Jung's perspective, the enduring power of this novel does not lie in its simple storyline. It lies in the way its symbols awaken experiences that countless people have felt, but struggle to put into words. As we read, we do not understand the story through reason alone. We also experience the quiet feeling of being reminded of something that has long existed within ourselves. This is how symbols work. They do not force us to believe. They gently awaken recognition. Perhaps this is why a fictional story can sometimes move us more deeply than a report filled with facts and statistics. Reason absorbs information, but symbols touch emotion. We may forget countless numbers after only a few days, yet remember a single image that has stayed with us for years. What remains is not necessarily more complex. It remains because it is connected with a deeper layer of the soul. You might imagine a symbol as a key designed to fit many different locks. From the outside, it appears completely ordinary, but when it meets the right door, it can open an entire world we never knew existed. Symbols work in much the same way. The same image may awaken different layers of meaning in different people, because each person is opening a different door within themselves. What truly matters is not what a symbol objectively means, but what it unlocks within us. This is also why Jung was always cautious about interpreting symbols through fixed formulas. No book can honestly claim that a bird always represents one thing, or that the sea always symbolizes something else. A symbol only becomes truly alive when it is understood within the psychological experience of the individual encountering it. An image becomes a symbol only when it connects with the inner life of the observer. Therefore, what matters is not memorizing symbolic meanings, but learning to pay attention to our own responses when we encounter them. The fascinating truth is that we encounter these symbols every day without even realizing it. They appear in novels, films, paintings, songs, and even in the bedtime stories children hear before falling asleep. Some images immediately bring us peace. Others disturb or deeply move us without knowing why. According to Jung, it is often because the unconscious recognizes something long before consciousness can express it in words. After all, the soul's first language has never been abstract concepts. It has always begun with images. Once we understand this, we begin reading stories differently. Instead of asking only whether a character is right or wrong, we may ask ourselves whom we identify with most deeply, which character makes us the most uncomfortable, and which moment continues lingering in our minds long after the final page has been turned. Very often, those reactions reveal parts of ourselves that we have never truly noticed before. Myths and literature do not live life on our behalf, but they help us see our own lives from a far deeper perspective. Perhaps this is also one of the simplest ways to begin listening to the language of symbols in everyday life. The next time a story, a film, or even a single image causes you to pause a little longer than usual, remain quietly with that feeling for a few moments and gently ask yourself, what is there in this image that resembles something within me? Do not rush to find an answer, and do not feel compelled to explain every detail. Simply allow the question to remain and notice which emotion appears first. Often that small emotional response is already a sign that a hidden part of the soul has recognized something before consciousness has found the words for it. From that moment on, the symbol is no longer merely an image outside ourselves. It becomes a mirror through which we begin to see more clearly what has been quietly unfolding within us. Number 12. Synchronicity and the meaning behind meaningful coincidences. From the symbols preserved in myths and literature, Jung went on to recognize that meaning does not appear only in the stories humanity tells. Sometimes it emerges unexpectedly in the middle of everyday life, when an external event happens to coincide with an inner movement already unfolding deep within us. These moments may seem small, yet they often leave us with the uncanny feeling that what has just happened somehow resonates with the deepest state of our soul. Jung called this phenomenon synchronicity, meaningful coincidence. In daily life, we frequently encounter random events. We think about someone, and moments later they call us. We are struggling with an important decision, then unexpectedly hear a story that speaks directly to what we have been contemplating. We enter a place we never planned to visit and meet someone who later changes the course of our lives. Most of these coincidences pass quickly without much attention, but sometimes an event arrives at such a precise moment that it makes us pause, not because it is extraordinary in itself, but because it seems to reflect something that has been quietly unfolding within us for a very long time. Jung described synchronicity as an acausal connecting principle, a principle of connection that does not depend on ordinary cause and effect. This means that an external event does not directly create an inner psychological state. nor do our thoughts necessarily cause what happens around us. Yet they meet at the same moment and become connected through the meaning they hold for the person experiencing them. What makes a coincidence remarkable is therefore not simply how rare it is, but how deeply it touches an issue carrying great psychological significance in our lives. The story of Harrison Ford offers an easy way to understand this idea. Ford, the American actor best known for portraying Han Solo in Star Wars and Indiana Jones in the film series of the same name, spent many years before his breakthrough receiving only small acting roles. His acting career did not provide enough income to support his family, so he worked as a carpenter. That job was never part of his dream of becoming a movie star. It was simply the practical way he kept his family afloat, while the path he had chosen showed almost no signs of leading to success. Throughout those years, Harrison Ford quietly continued developing his acting skills. He had appeared in George Lucas's American Graffiti, but at the time, no one could have known that this connection would later lead to one of the defining roles of his career. Ford was not one of Hollywood's most sought-after actors. He simply continued living between two worlds, one that allowed him to earn a living and another where his talent as an actor had not yet been fully recognized. The turning point arrived in a way even Ford himself had never expected. While George Lucas was casting actors for Star Wars, Harrison Ford was invited to read lines alongside performers auditioning for the film. At first, he did not walk into that room believing he was competing for the role of Han Solo. Yet the way he delivered the character convinced Lucas that Ford possessed exactly the rugged, practical, and charismatic presence the role required. In the end, a man earning his living as a carpenter became the actor who would forever be associated with one of cinema's most iconic characters. Seen from the outside, we might simply call this luck. Harrison Ford happened to be in the right place, met the right director, and happened to read the right lines at exactly the right moment. But from Jung's perspective, what truly matters is not merely the coincidence of circumstances. That moment became meaningful because it met a person who had already been quietly preparing himself for years. Had Ford not spent years accepting small roles, patiently refining his craft, and remaining committed to acting despite almost no recognition, the opportunity might still have appeared, but it would not necessarily have produced the same outcome. Synchronicity, then, is not necessarily a miracle descending from the outside to rescue us. It is more like the meeting point of two paths that have been slowly moving toward one another all along. One path belongs to circumstances, encounters, unexpected events, and opportunities beyond our complete control. The other belongs to the inner world, the years of experience, disappointment, choices, and growth that often prepare us for something without even realizing it. When those two paths finally meet, the moment may appear accidental, yet it carries profound meaning for the person living through it. You might imagine synchronicity as two hands moving across the face of a clock. Most of the time, they travel at different speeds, passing countless positions without ever overlapping. But eventually, they align perfectly at a single point. Neither hand pulls the other into place, yet their meeting creates a unique moment. Outer life and inner transformation work much the same way. They may unfold independently for years until one event arrives at precisely the right time, making what has been quietly maturing within us suddenly visible. At the same time, synchronicity is easily misunderstood. When we desperately hope for a particular outcome, we may begin treating every small detail around us as confirmation of what we already want to believe. A repeating number, a sentence overheard by chance, or an unexpected encounter can quickly be interpreted as proof that our decision is unquestionably correct. Jung never encouraged people to surrender their judgment to coincidences. Synchronicity is not a form of fortune-telling, nor does it imply that every event has been predestined to guide us toward one fixed outcome. The true value of a meaningful coincidence lies in its ability to reveal what is genuinely happening within us. It may illuminate a conflict we have long avoided, a desire we have never admitted, or a direction in life that we are finally becoming ready to embrace. But it cannot weigh consequences on our behalf, nor eliminate the uncertainty that always accompanies important choices. Harrison Ford received an unexpected opportunity, but that opportunity became life-changing only because of his ability, his experience, and the way he was prepared to step through the door when it finally opened. Perhaps this is why meaningful coincidences often become most apparent during periods of transition. They tend to appear when an old identity is gradually losing its strength, when a long-held decision begins to be questioned, or when a new direction has emerged but is still too uncertain to fully name. In such moments, an unexpected event can resemble a brief beam of light shining across the road ahead. It may not illuminate the entire journey, but it is enough to reveal where we currently stand and what part of ourselves can no longer remain ignored. And perhaps this is the deepest meaning of synchronicity in Jung's philosophy. Meaningful coincidences do not come to live our lives for us, nor do they spare us from making difficult choices. They simply create moments when the outer world and the inner soul unexpectedly illuminate one another. Harrison Ford did not become an actor because of one fortunate coincidence alone. Rather, that coincidence allowed years of quiet preparation to meet the very opportunity that had finally arrived. Our own lives may contain similar points of intersection. We usually recognize them only in hindsight, when seemingly unrelated events begin to reveal themselves as parts of a much larger movement. Not everything carries a hidden meaning, and not every coincidence needs to be interpreted. But every now and then, among the countless random events of life, one moment touches the deepest part of who we are. It does not promise where the future will lead. It simply reminds us that something within has been quietly maturing long enough to recognize the door that has just appeared before us. Number 13. Individuation and the journey of becoming who you truly are. And when meaningful coincidences help us realize that the outer world can sometimes reflect the quiet movements taking place within us, Jung's exploration of the human psyche still does not come to an end. Recognizing a sign is not the same as truly changing. The more important question is this: after each encounter with ourselves, how will we choose to live differently? From that question, Jung developed one of the central ideas of analytical psychology, individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming the person we were born to be. Most of us begin life by learning how to adapt. We gradually discover which behaviors earn acceptance, which choices are considered right, and what kind of success makes other people proud. This adaptation is necessary because no one can mature in complete isolation from society. Yet over time, what once helped us find our place in the world can also drown out our own inner voice. We continue fulfilling our responsibilities and following what appears to be a sensible path, while becoming less and less certain which desires truly belong to us and which are merely patterns we have repeated for far too long. This distance rarely begins with a dramatic crisis. More often, it starts with a quiet exhaustion from continuing a life in which nothing is obviously wrong, yet nothing feels entirely right anymore. Someone may finally achieve the stability they once longed for, only to discover it brings far less joy than expected. Another person may be known for always being strong, yet have no idea how to admit they are completely worn out. Someone else may spend years preserving peace in every relationship, never stopping to ask whether that peace has been built upon their own silence. Outwardly, everything appears intact. But inwardly, one part of the self has quietly grown tired of being ignored. Jung once wrote, "Individuation means becoming an individual, and insofar as individuality embraces our innermost, last and incomparable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self." For Jung, individuation is not about becoming different simply to prove we are more unique than others. It is the process of distinguishing what genuinely belongs to us from everything shaped by family, society, and the past. We can still love deeply, remain connected to others, and live responsibly, without allowing our entire identity to be defined by what other people expect from us. This process often begins with very small moments. A person no longer accepts additional responsibilities simply because they fear disappointing someone else. They stop apologizing every time they express a legitimate need. They begin recognizing the personal cost of maintaining a job, a relationship, or an image that no longer reflects who they truly are. These choices may not transform life overnight, but each one quietly returns a small part of the authority they had unconsciously surrendered to old patterns. Yet individuation cannot be measured merely by outward changes. Someone may change careers, leave a relationship, or begin an entirely new life while still carrying exactly the same fears and unconscious patterns. Meanwhile, another person may remain in the same circumstances, yet inwardly begin seeing everything through a completely different awareness. They understand why they are staying, what they are afraid of, and which boundaries can no longer continue to be crossed. True transformation lies not only in where we leave behind, but also in whether we continue carrying the same unconscious pattern into every new situation. The difficulty is that living closer to our authentic selves does not always feel comfortable. A person who has spent years pleasing others may feel guilty the first time they say no. Someone whose self-worth has always depended on achievement may become anxious when they finally allow themselves to rest. A person who has built an identity around being strong may feel ashamed when admitting they need help. These emotions do not necessarily mean the new path is the wrong one. Sometimes they simply reveal that an old way of living is gradually losing its grip, while we have not yet become familiar with the freedom now opening before us. You might imagine individuation as a musician rediscovering the true voice of an instrument after years of performing only compositions written by others. They may play flawlessly, keep perfect rhythm, and receive endless praise. Yet the music still lacks their own unique expression. Rediscovering that authentic voice does not mean throwing away every technique they have learned or deliberately trying to sound different simply to attract attention. It requires listening more deeply, recognizing what genuinely resonates within, and gradually allowing their outward performance to harmonize with what has always been quietly playing inside. Individuation works in much the same way. It does not destroy the person we once were. It allows us to live everything we have become in a more truthful way. According to Jung, maturity also does not mean eliminating every inner contradiction. We may still long for closeness while needing solitude, feel eager to move forward while fearing the loss of what is familiar. Individuation teaches us that we no longer have to reject one side in order to protect the other. We can long for love without handing someone else complete authority over our lives. We can experience anger without allowing it to harm those around us. We can pursue success without making it the only proof of our worth. Wholeness comes not from making every part of ourselves identical, but from becoming conscious of them and refusing to let any single part secretly live our lives in our place. This transformation gradually becomes visible in ordinary life. A person can receive criticism without immediately concluding they are a failure. They can acknowledge that an old choice no longer fits without rejecting everything they have experienced along the way. In relationships, they learn to listen carefully without constantly sacrificing their own voice simply to avoid conflict. They may still hesitate and sometimes even fall back into familiar reactions, but now they recognize what is happening instead of being completely carried away by it. Individuation, therefore, is never a destination reached once and for all. Every stage of life reveals another part of ourselves waiting to be recognized. What once gave us stability may eventually become the very thing that limits our growth. Becoming ourselves does not mean discovering one permanent definition and holding on to it forever. It means continuing to recognize when an old way of living is no longer honest and having the courage to change without denying everything we have previously been through. Perhaps the deepest meaning of individuation is that it never asks us to become someone entirely different. It simply invites us to reclaim the parts of ourselves that were abandoned because of fear, expectation, or the longing to be accepted. Every time we recognize an old reaction without automatically following it, every time we choose from understanding instead of fear, our inner world becomes a little more integrated. And eventually, we come to realize that becoming ourselves is not about discovering a perfect version waiting at the end of the road. It is about finally stopping the habit of leaving our true selves behind with every step we take. Number 14. Self and the path toward wholeness. The journey of individuation gradually brings us closer to what is most authentic within ourselves. Yet for Jung, this process is not simply about discovering what we like, what we want, or which direction we should take in life. More profoundly, it is the journey of bringing together the parts of ourselves that have long been separated. Jung called this unifying center the self. The self is not a perfect version of ourselves waiting to be achieved. Rather, it is the totality that embraces what we already know about ourselves, what we still avoid, and the possibilities we have not yet fully lived. For this reason, moving toward wholeness does not mean becoming free of inner contradictions. We may still be both strong and vulnerable, long for closeness while needing solitude, trust our choices while occasionally feeling uncertain. These different sides of ourselves do not necessarily oppose one another. They become problematic only when we believe one side deserves to exist while the other must remain hidden. The self begins to reveal itself when we stop forcing ourselves into a single, limited identity. Michael, a friend of mine who lives in Seattle, once shared something that stayed with me for a long time. For years, he believed he was simply an easygoing person. He rarely argued, almost never showed irritation, and was usually the first to say that everything was fine. Whenever someone disappointed him, he quickly found reasons to understand them. Whenever he was treated unfairly, he reminded himself that perhaps he was simply being too sensitive. He believed this calmness proved that he had become emotionally mature and capable of controlling his feelings. But as time passed, Michael began noticing something strange. He often became emotionally distant without understanding why. There were conversations during which he smiled politely, yet afterward had no desire to see that person again. There were requests he accepted without hesitation, while quietly carrying resentment that lingered for days. Michael had always assumed those feelings were flaws that should be eliminated. Only when he looked more honestly at himself did he realize that his anger had never appeared to turn him into a bitter person. It had been trying to show him that certain boundaries had been crossed for far too long, while he continued clinging to the image of someone who always understood everyone else. Jung once wrote, "The self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference which embraces both conscious and unconscious. It is the center of this totality, just as the ego is the center of consciousness." According to Jung, the self is both the center and the complete circle embracing consciousness and the unconscious alike. What we consciously know about ourselves is only one small part of a much larger psychological reality. An emotion we reject does not disappear simply because we refuse to acknowledge it. It continues expressing itself through reactions we cannot explain, exhaustion without an obvious cause, or the quiet distance that gradually grows between ourselves and those around us. For Michael, moving closer to the self did not mean suddenly expressing every feeling of anger or reacting harshly whenever something upset him. What changed was that he no longer saw anger itself as proof that he was becoming a bad person. Instead, he began asking what his anger was trying to protect, then chose healthier ways to express it. Sometimes that meant honestly telling someone their words had hurt him. Sometimes it meant declining a request he would once have accepted out of obligation. Other times, it meant realizing that the real problem lay within his own fear rather than in the person standing before him. From Jung's perspective, this is precisely what movement toward wholeness looks like. Michael did not replace kindness with hardness. He simply stopped using kindness as a way of denying the part of himself that knew how to protect healthy boundaries. Once both sides were acknowledged, his relationships naturally became more genuine. He remained compassionate, yet no longer felt compelled to pretend everything was always fine. He could still be gentle, but that gentleness was no longer built upon constantly abandoning his own feelings. You might imagine the self as a stained glass window made from many different pieces of colored glass. Some are bright, others dark. Some are transparent, while others contain colors that seem impossible to place beside one another. Looking at each piece separately, we might decide that certain fragments are too dark or not beautiful enough. Yet when light shines through the entire window, those very differences become the reason the complete image exists. Human beings are much the same. Not every part of us feels pleasant, but every part carries valuable information about what we have lived through, what we currently need, and how we can live more truthfully. What matters is remembering that wholeness does not mean justifying every reaction we have. Acknowledging anger does not give us permission to hurt others. Recognizing fear does not mean allowing fear to make every decision. Accepting the selfish part of ourselves does not require abandoning compassion. The self does not free us from responsibility. On the contrary, the more parts of ourselves we consciously recognize, the greater our ability becomes to choose how those parts are expressed, instead of allowing them to act unconsciously on our behalf. A person living close to the self is therefore not someone who is always calm or completely certain. They may still feel confused, become deeply hurt, or make poor decisions. The difference is that they no longer turn one mistake into a final judgment about their entire identity. They can admit they reacted poorly without concluding that they are fundamentally a bad person. They can recognize a weakness without allowing it to erase every other strength they possess. No temporary emotional state is ever given the authority to define their entire worth. Living closer to the self also helps us stop placing all our value in one single area of life. We may continue caring deeply about our work without allowing one professional failure to erase everything else we are. We may love another person wholeheartedly without making their choice the sole measure of whether we are worthy of love. We may continue pursuing success without needing that success to prove that our existence has value. When our lives are supported by many different parts of ourselves, one disappointment is no longer powerful enough to cause our entire identity to collapse. The self is not a destination reached once and then permanently possessed. Every stage of life reveals another aspect of ourselves that earlier experiences could not yet uncover. Some qualities once considered weaknesses later become our greatest source of compassion. Some patterns that once helped us survive eventually no longer fit the person we wish to become. Wholeness, therefore, is not about imprisoning ourselves inside one final definition. It is about continually expanding enough that every new inner transformation can find its rightful place within our lives. Tomorrow morning, after you wake up, take one slow, deep breath and quietly say to yourself, "Today, I choose to live wholeheartedly as myself." The path toward the self does not begin by repairing yourself into someone perfect. It begins the moment you stop treating your unfinished parts as enemies and gradually learn to welcome them back into their rightful place within the whole of who you are. When that happens, wholeness is no longer a distant ideal. It becomes the way you show up, make choices, and live each day without continuing to leave yourself behind. After spending these past 2 hours exploring the psychology of Carl Jung together, perhaps the most meaningful thing you can do now is not to hold on to one more idea, but simply to allow your mind to slow down. Nothing you have heard today needs to become an immediate answer. These reflections can remain quietly within you, like faint traces that only become visible once the noise inside begins to settle. The world of the psyche never opens itself through hurry. Some emotions must pass through many layers of silence before they can be recognized. Some dreams require time before their meaning reveals itself. And some of the deepest parts of ourselves emerge only when we stop demanding that everything be understood overnight. Jung never viewed maturity as the process of becoming someone without darkness, wounds, or inner conflict. Instead, he showed us that wholeness begins the moment we stop treating our most difficult parts as enemies. We can still feel afraid without allowing fear to decide the course of our entire lives. We can still experience grief without believing that all hope has disappeared. We can still make mistakes without turning those mistakes into a permanent judgment of who we are. Once we stop endlessly fighting what is already happening within us, a different kind of peace quietly begins to emerge. Not because every problem has vanished, but because we no longer divide ourselves into parts that deserve love and parts that must remain hidden. So tonight, when you close your eyes after watching this video, allow everything you have heard to return to stillness. You do not need to heal your entire past before tomorrow begins, nor do you need to fully understand yourself before allowing yourself to rest. Tomorrow may greet you with the same familiar responsibilities. Yet if you can pause before one old reaction, truly listen to one long neglected emotion, or show a little more kindness toward one unfinished part of yourself, then an important inner transformation has already begun. If this video has helped bring even a little more peace to your mind, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel as we continue exploring the inner world through the wisdom of Carl Jung. I wish you a peaceful night, and I hope that when tomorrow arrives, you step into it not as someone completely different, but as someone who understands and feels closer to yourself than ever before.